Thank you for being here, coming to speak about In Camera. I'd like to start off by saying I really enjoyed the movie. We watched it last night. I already came up and spoke to you a lot about it. It's the details, the connections, all of the surreal part of it, which is so cool. So let's start at the beginning. How did you come about with the idea of this story?
Ooh, you know what it is? Like when I'm writing, things just grow in my notes app for a very long time until it's time to sit down and write. I had this idea when I was like 20. I was in the final year of uni, and I knew I wanted to write kind of like a fairy tale about identity and kind of the horror of like identity politics. And I remember thinking the role of the actor was like kind of the perfect metaphor to talk about all of this. And I think when you're an actor and you enter a room or you're like read on a screen or stage, like everything you bring with you, your age, your race, your gender, all of the associations around you are so loaded. And I think I really wanted to say something about kind of being a young person today and like all of the implications around the kind of body that looks like Aiden.
Oh. And did you always want this to be a film, or did the story, as you were creating it, then sort of make sense to turn it into a movie?
You know what? It was always a film, and I made a short film, a terrible short film that no one should ever Google, called Parts, and it has a scene that's directly the same exact scene in camera. And I think it's the audition scene. There's like a when he's auditioning for a casting director, it's like word for word the exact same scene as in camera. I've actually not said that. You can see it on YouTube, but don't look for it. Yeah, I think a fairy tale about an actor is what I knew, and I just built it for years. And then when the opportunity came about to actually sit down and commit to writing a feature film, I kind of just started from that, like a fairy tale about an actor navigating kind of a nightmarish version of an industry.
I was going to say, and did the changes in the industry recently have an effect on your story, like what we saw with the pandemic and the strikes in Hollywood, at least?
So I wrote this, I handed the script into BBC just before the pandemic.
Okay.
But I think, you know what, like art is always reflecting the world and the world's always reflecting art. And like, this has been a really experience for lots of different reasons. And it's pretty crazy, but I'll be honest, again, I've had no access to the film industry when I wrote this. I wrote this when I was an academic. I didn't go to film school. I've not been to auditions. So it was kind of all from like an imagined point of view. I remember very early on saying to myself, you know what it is? I'm interested in representing life as it feels, not as it is. So that would be like the nucleus for everything. Like I'm trying to represent how something feels to these characters, not necessarily how it is. And I think when you free yourself from like literal representation of like of realism, you get to play in like a really exciting space.
Yeah, because there's a lot that can actually like you can relate to with this character. You don't have to be an actor. You don't have to have gone through that specific experience to actually like relate. Like there was a lot of times where I was just sitting there nodding and be like, yep, I get that.
Yeah.
Where there's like a bit of discrimination there's a little bit of racism that happens. There's like, getting passed off. There's a lot that's universal there as well.
I mean, we're all kind of actors in our everyday life too. Like when you can go for a job interview, it's kind of like an audition. But yeah, I'm glad that comes across. And I think it's really about like what it means to be a young person, like living in a world today.
Yeah, no, I love that. And you mentioned as well the way that you wrote and structured this story was like a concept album.
Yeah.
with two sides and tracks and everything. Why did you choose to structure it that way and present it to actors and the rest of the team?
I think every single film is an invention, and I'm a bit like a toddler. I'm a bit like, I look at things and I'm like, why? So when constructing this, like I'm really obsessed with structure. Like I was doing a PhD in English, so like structure is something that usually comes first for me. And like when I saw this early on, I thought it's like an album. It has two sides and it has this beat switch in the middle of it. And I wanted to structure it like an album. And that's just the way it came. And then I wrote it like track 1, track 2, track 3, 10 tracks on every side. And to me, it was like an endless tessellation, like a looping pattern, endlessly repeating itself. And I think, when you're coming at a medium as an outsider, it's really important to interrogate all of the tools that you're inheriting. A lot of the time, the tools of cinema have been developed in the military and have been used against people like us. So when you're inheriting these tools, you really have to question, like, how are you choosing to represent the people that you're working with and the violence of some of these tools, like you're contending with how someone like me, Naban, Amir, like how our visual representation has previously been portrayed, there's like a burden of inheritance there. And I think I want to, from a structural level, from a narrative structural level to how I choose to organize a day on a set, I really want to kind of question everything that I'm inheriting. And I was really inspired by like abolitionist literature. I was reading like a lot of like Malcolm X and Bell Hooks and Naomi Klein, and Franz Fanon was a big one for this. And I think a lot of those like ideas around abolition and they really inspired kind of everything from the structure to the workflow.
Switching to Amir, you talked a little bit last night about how it was a little bit confusing and unique having that sort of structure of, that the script that he gave you. Can you tell us?
And I think a lot of those like ideas around abolition and they really inspired kind of everything from the structure to the workflow.
Switching to Amir, you talked a little bit last night about how it was a little bit confusing and unique having that sort of structure of, the script that he gave you. Can you tell us more about that and how that process was to understand what the story was that he was trying to say?
Yeah, I mean, through like several different like meetings and rehearsal processes with Naqqash and Nuban and Rory, we were finding our like footing and our relationships and also our own trials and tribulations as people. It was interesting having a conversation with one of our movement coaches as well, who is Black, and we all have different assumptions or assumed also prejudices and assumptions that other person might have less of an issue with this kind of scenario than the other person or whatnot. And within that frame, you can encapsulate that thinking as well into the work that you're doing. And it's interesting because even between Aiden and Conrad, you start to see that. And through Aiden's thinking, he's like, why does this guy have it better than me? Even in his own work, and why does he have this outlook? Maybe he doesn't go through the same issues that I go through. And that's a subconscious thought that maybe some people possess as well. So yeah, and also our rehearsal process, it was very cyclical in its nature, and I liked kind of giving different interpretations of the scene and stuff, but being allowed to like play and also flip the script as well and improvise as well was kind of an opportunity that we all relished, I think.
Yeah, so it was freeing then.
Oh, definitely. I think we all knew what our objectives were in the scene. We all knew what we needed to say, and then there was room for us to also play and yeah, try different things and see what's the best option, I guess, in the edit.
And then how did you choose which scene to go with, or how did you know that you'd gotten enough or you'd gotten the right take as you were doing all of these changes every single take?
I think naturally we had a variety of things that we did for every scene, and I guess in the edit you ultimately decided with Ricardo, right? Like what was the best choice for that given moment in the story. Yeah. And but also like the technique in which we go into the scenes. Like I remember sometimes Naqqash telling me, give him nothing, or endow him as a cat in this, something kind of as far-fetched as that. Or, I tell him like, I'm actually thinking of, messing with him even more and trying the scene in a different accent. And then, and what does that say about the scene? Does it say like that this guy is going through a crisis in his head where he just, he's not able to even to think straight, and the wires are completely crossed and muddled, and so it was quite interesting that you decided to take that take as well. Yeah.
I think also like I have a really clear set idea of like what it is I want to do, but like I want to invite in the world, like the conversations we were having around the set, just about our lives and the world. Like I really wanted to bring those into it. So I'm I'm very reactive. I think I have like a clear idea, but like I want to like respond to the world and everyone around me and slowly bring that in. And it's not in this like grand plan way. It's just like being responsive to life, you know, and in a similar way in the edit it was like that too. It's like a very clearly highly constructed way of working, but like with this freedom. And I think you can only have that freedom if you kind of know where it is you're going. But for me also, it's freeing to free myself from the idea that I already have, if that makes sense. Like if an interesting pocket of conversation is opening in a rehearsal, like I want to invite that in and allow myself to be challenged by it and put it into the work. And I think it's exciting to work in that way. And you can only work in that way if you really have trust in your collaborators and if they have that full trust in you too. Our rehearsal process was very much like we were going over the text, but we were just like getting to know each other and bonding, the four of us. And I think having that trust on set, because, you know, it's an independent film, you get like 1 or 2 takes. So we did a lot of that play in the rehearsal space. So it felt like everyone tuned into like the frequency of their character and how that character operated in relation to other characters. So there was kind of like a template to work from when we got on set. It wasn't a case of like, when nobody knows what they're doing on set. It was like, we were quite prepared because of that rehearsal process. But it's exciting to let the world in, you know?
Yeah, that's really cool. And I mean, you mentioned you had messed with,
you know?
Yeah, that's really cool. And I mean, you mentioned you had messed with Navon a little bit, or through your direction, kind of did the opposite ever happen? Did he ever mess with you in any scene?
No, he didn't. No, and I don't think Conrad would allow that to happen. I think there was definitely like. With Aiden, it was a game of nurture and status. Not in I'm better than you sort of way, but more in like I've got all the answers you need, or I think you need. Whereas with Rory's character, Bo, it seemed like a very streamlined, equal friendship. That was also very. You rarely see men having vulnerable, healthy conversations and opening up to each other. And that scene, the haircut scene, where Bo starts talking about this recurring dream he has of the building bleeding. And even just that, the idea of cutting someone's hair, it's such a close kind of intimate scenario where two people can have a very open conversation. And it's a thing that a lot of people you talk to go get their haircuts, like barbershops or even in a hair salon or whatever. You have that conversation with the hairdresser or the barber, where you just kind of feel for some reason you're just opening up and it's unfiltered. It's quite interesting though.
And then with the character that Navon was playing and knowing that he was eventually going to be mimicking or mirroring you, was that part of your preparation for Conrad, or did that come later?
Interesting. Yeah, that's a good question. I think I was partly conscious of the fact that I had to be someone bigger and larger than he was. Mm-hmm. And the light and shade between that, I think was accessible for me. So if it's accessible for me, it will be for someone that is also doing the complete opposite and being very minimal and minute. So he has somewhere to go later on. But yeah, the gesticulations and all that, I think that came later on in part of the process. I think those scenes to me felt very Pinteresque, and it was nice and refreshing to be allowed to have space and pause and take our time in those scenes as well. That allowed us to be to go darker. Yeah.
Yeah, I like that the scenes were like you let the scenes linger. You let the audience experience the scenes, and also with the music, and just it was really nicely paced. I really enjoyed that. And then speaking also of Conrad and that relationship that he had. Wow, why am I forgetting the name of the main character? Aiden, there you go. Sorry, I keep wanting to say Abed. I don't know why. But speaking of that relationship between Conrad and Aiden, and we were chatting as well. It was almost like Aiden did create Conrad. So was that again ever part of your process, knowing that he was ultimately going to be a figment of
Yeah.
yeah, I like that the scenes were like you let the scenes linger. Do you let the audience experience the scenes, and also with the music, and just it was really nicely paced. I really enjoyed that. And then speaking also of Conrad and that relationship that he had. Well, am I forgetting the name of the main character? Aiden, there you go. Sorry, I keep wanting to say Abed. I don't know why. But speaking of that relationship between Conrad and Aiden, and we were chatting as well, it was almost like Aiden did create Conrad. So was that again ever part of your process, knowing that he was ultimately going to be a figment of his imagination? It was,
That was a conversation that we had early on, actually. Yeah. That is all this just kind of dreamt up, something that is a personality that he really wants to reach, and or an alter ego kind of thing.
It's almost like the pinnacle of what he wanted to be, and he created it in his mind, and it manifested, and then. But
it's also sad in a way because neither of them are actually, in the grand scheme of things, like successful, they're all still roommates in a small apartment, in Manchester, where, and they're still all hustling and stuff, it's not the pinnacle of what maybe Aiden wants in his life, was to be probably a movie star, or, so yeah, there is progress, and it's quite funny in like towards the end where Conrad, when he goes away on a work trip and he gets a promotion, and there's like that there's that double kind of thing of like, I want to bring my boys along, but it's also a projection of like, oh, that's what one would say when I do become successful. I want to send the ladder back down, and like that could also be a version of what Aiden imagines he would say later on, like that kind of cliche kind of thing of like, I want to bring my boys along with me and stuff. It's just a thing that like, a lot of people say, but very few practice,
You see that with
But it's like, it is twofold, because we talked about this, and like in the edit, this is what was so fascinating about working with Amir's work in post. It's like there was this layer of like the character he was playing that felt like full-bodied and real, and there were moments of vulnerability, like with the haircut scene, for example. Like he feels like a fully three-dimensional character, and then there's this other thing, and it's this like who he is in the imagination of Aiden, and that two-dimensionalness of it is actually so complicated to do. Like I think what Amir is doing in the film, it looks on the surface very simple, but it's a really complex game, because you're essentially multi-rolling, and you're playing two characters, and one is this kind of horror that exists in someone's imagination, like a complete projection, and with that becomes like the gestures are also slightly different, and there's a little bit of it being like kind of like his mouth is moving, but it's like he's saying something else. And then there's this other thing, which is like he's a real person, he spent a year cutting hair before he's done the job that he's currently doing, and it feels like how you would approach like a realist character in a film. And then there's this kind of like almost kind of like horrific, almost like Beckett Brechtian kind of thing, where it's kind of like something like absurd, it's not, it doesn't exist, and there's something quite uncanny about it. And I think your choices were really subtle, but like it's so interesting to play with that balance, and then also to accentuate that balance, like in the sound design. Like when we first meet Amir's character, we were talking a little about this earlier, but like I really wanted to create a sense of unease, and for us to not pinpoint what the unease is. And what we did in the sound design, Paul Davies and his entire team and me, I had this idea one day. I was like, I really want this to be a vacuum. So like usually you would have like room tone when you have, even when there's silence, like you still hear the room, and like the nothingness is still like present in the mix. I really wanted to strip everything out, like almost like an Alien kind of scene, where it's like there's nothing, and in the absence of nothing, you're so hyper aware, and you feel a bit like, I kind of wanted to feel like you were like in like an anechoic chamber, where it's kind of like you can almost feel like your heart beating, or you're hyper aware of everything else. So like from the second the audience meet Conrad, there is this like vacuum. And I think his character operates like a vacuum in a way too. And I think there's something so interesting about vacuousness in our culture and how to play with that, you know, and as a site of horror.
Yeah. And then you play that up as well with like the pauses and even the smile in that scene.
You know, and as a site of horror.
Yeah. And then you play that up as well with like the pauses and even the smile in that scene. When we first meet Conrad, it was like brilliant.
Yeah.
You know, wearing both like all of the different on that scene as well.
I remember also that scene. That scene also, he's just shaven. And even then, it's like the start of the new character that he's going to embody.
Yeah.
And then I think, you missed a spot.
Yeah.
You missed a spot. Yeah. It was meant to be that I do remember doing that scene and going, I really want to mess with him. But also it was like also a place of like, what would he be expecting on what like as a reaction from being someone maybe quite self-conscious as well. So it was more that side of like, someone's not going to let that go.
Yeah.
Yeah, but yeah, that was quite. Yeah, I'm glad that like when the audience last night kind of, you know, found the moments of comedy in that.
Yes. Yeah, those are.
I mean, discomfort is hilarious.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. It's like discomfort. I'm obsessed with discomfort. I think even like the cutting style, it's like, oh, we're going to watch him for like 10 seconds. But then if you're in an audience of 500 people for 10 seconds, 10 seconds is like forever. You're like, hurry up. Why are we waiting here? What's going on? There's something quite frustrating about it. And I think there's something so exciting and playful about making the audience so aware of time passing.
Yes.
Because I feel like we don't like it. And I think in a way, I'm really excited by elements of the film that feel frustrating, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Because you're eliciting a response in someone, even if it's just like, come on, let's go. Like, you know, because like, we kind of feel like that way about Aiden too. Like he's a passive protagonist. It's like, you're not doing anything. Do something. Come on, let's go. And I think there's something really interesting about just like, you know what, let's hold for another 2 seconds. Yeah. I was thinking about the Chantal Ackerman quote recently, where she talks about like, when an audience goes to the cinema and if it's like, they say, oh, I didn't see the time go. Like they should feel like they've been robbed of something, you know, like there's something like not noticing time should be almost a bad thing. Like in cinema, maybe making the audience aware of time makes them aware of like actual time passing. And I think there's something so interesting about that. And cinema as an art form is so wrapped up in time. And like as a medium, it's so linked to time. And I think there's something exciting about like being aware that time is passing that I wanted to play with. Yeah.
And you do that a little bit with like the repetition as well as your scenes. Can you talk a little bit more about like the patterns that you put in? Between
yes.
There's so many. Like I started a list of just like the things that I noticed, and I know I'm missing a ton.
When I was talking about like what is our inheritance, I was looking at like a lot of artists, like Muslim artists who were like engaging in like geometric abstraction, tessellations, looping patterns, and I felt like questioning like what is my inheritance. And like a lot of like Middle Eastern, South Asian, Muslim artists, like the work is always like repeating patterns, loops, geometric. Like in our cultures, there is this kind of sense of like things being cyclical and not necessarily like beginning, middle, and end. And I think there's something very Western about the conception of a hero going on a journey to conquer, you know? And like, that's not what I wanted to do. I wanted kind of like to be in this more like dream space where it felt like a pattern repeating itself. And I looked at a lot of Anwar Jalal, Shams, Rashid Areen, Zarina Hashmi, might not be her name. Lots of art, endless art. I had like books and books of like artists from Middle East and South Asia, and also in the West, like from our backgrounds, like and looking at the cyclical nature of things. And I think there's just something so fascinating about it. And I wanted the script to also like have this as the pattern. Was that your question?
Yeah, no, and it does in more than one way.
Yeah.
All the way back to the beginning when he kills Conrad.
Yeah.
But there's the 22 stabs that hit me.
Yes. It says the pattern. Is that your question?
Yeah, no, and it does
yeah.
in more than one way.
Yeah.
All the way back to the beginning when he kills Conrad.
Yeah.
We're talking about the 22 stabs that hit me.
Yes.
The character that Aiden at the very beginning is
22 times. Yeah.
Stabbings.
Yeah.
And then even when the way that he treats supporting actor in the scene that he's in the car.
Yes, loops.
In exactly the same way. So what you were speaking about earlier, saying this is how he thinks, if he were in that situation, when Conrad is like, ascending down the ladder, that's what he thinks he would do. But in reality, he just went right back to how he was treated.
Yeah.
In the very beginning. I loved it coming back.
Yeah. Because I think what I wanted to do with the cyclical stuff is to like use that to comment on like the systems that we inherit and violence being cyclical. I think like there's something about like Aiden starts us off as like a colonized subject. I mean, the reason why I picked Aiden as well is like it's a place in Yemen that was formerly colonized by the British, and the British had control over it. So I kind of wanted like a colonial name for him, and he starts off as like a colonized subject, and then he becomes the colonizer in like him robbing something from Conrad, or this idea that there can only be one of us in this space. It's quite like a colonial idea, like this essentialism of like one can dominate. We can't create like multiple people can't exist in the same space, if that makes sense. So to me, like it's a story about like a colonial subject becoming the colonizer, and like I wanted to have all of these like, looping patterns of violence essentially. But yeah, I love a repeat.
Yeah.
I love the dialogue that loops too. There's lots of dialogue that loops too.
Like 3 more times. Just to, like, fully absorb
that's
it.
true.
How are you guys doing in terms of like comfort, time, energy? Like, listen, I could do this all night. I'm just telling you right now. But okay. Oh yeah, we kind of touched on this a little bit, but the blurring the boundaries between what's real and what's imagined.
Yes.
How did you go about deciding how to showcase that, and then also like how much you actually get, let the audience be privy to? Because there's like moments in there where I'm like, is this supposed to be real? Is it supposed to be imaginary? And I know for sure you guys have the answer, but as the audience, we're meant to kind of be confused.
Yeah, completely. I think there's something really interesting about the space between what is dream and real life and what is reality and what's not. And although it's very crafted, it's hopefully an atmosphere that kind of just is all over the piece. And I think by the end of it, it's exciting if someone says, oh, I don't think none of this is real. Like maybe this is real and that's real. And I don't think the author of a piece or the director of a piece should have all the answers.
Okay.
I think there should be room for an audience to have an interpretation, and I'm really excited about that. I have my own interpretation of the film, but I don't think my interpretation of the film is necessarily the singular correct one. And I'm more interested in questions, answers, to be honest.
Yeah, and I feel like this is one of those movies where the more you watch it, like every time you watch it, you're just going to get something new out of it. It's going to be a different experience.
I hope so. Those are the kinds of films I want to make, like I feel like a film should be a film that could never be made by another group of people. It could only be made by us in that time of our lives. Like we couldn't make in camera ever again because we're not those people anymore. I think there's something really exciting about that. And as an audience member, I want to watch a film that is a completely different world, that is someone else's completely different perspective. That's what I want. I don't want to see the same stuff over and over again. So ultimately, selfishly, I just want to make the stuff that I want to see too. Because we're artists because we like this and we want to play out and we want to do things that we want to do. So something exciting about that.
I love that. And this might be a little bit of a crazy question, but given that you guys have all of these different takes that are so wildly different, is there a possibility of there being like a different movie that could be made with the cuts that did not make it into this?
Yes, there's 55 hours of footage. There are many films this could be, but this is the film that it is. And
To be a fly on the wall.
That's the whole of the film. But this is the film I wanted to make. And at the end of the day, I think it's a bit dangerous when we talk about this idea of an imagined audience. All I can do as an artist is like say what I want to say and be happy with this is the film that I want to make. And if people like it, and people have been liking it, it's such a beautiful thing. That's amazing. But ultimately, you have to put something out and know that if people don't respond to it, if people don't like it, but you like it, and it's what you wanted to say, you get to keep that. And I think like work should be singular. I think we should make things that is unique and pushing the boundaries of what we can do in this medium, because ultimately this medium has only been around for 100 years. We're all working in a new art form. So that to me is really exciting. Completely.
And then what was it like for you working
we're all working in a new art form. So that to me is really exciting. Completely.
So, and then what was it like for you working in a world that is, not quite reality? There's a little bit of imagined parts to it. Like, what was it like creating this character, knowing it's traveling both of those?
Like super fun. Like to put simply, it was freeing actually, because I wasn't going through a particular method in like how I normally approach a role or how I normally tackle a character. It was always a process of like building and then dismantling, building and then freeing ourselves of that completely. I think, I don't know, I actually really enjoyed that experience because it felt way more collaborative, and like there were no wrong answers. Let's just try. If we know what objectives are for every scene, we can just try different things, because also, like you say, like the characters are not, so can be fictional and can be real, so you can play. There's maybe we could have done it in an Irish accent in one of the scenes and it would have still worked, so I think that's the fun of playing a role that sits in both worlds.
That's really cool. And then with that freedom, does it also become difficult to know what to do in a scene like that?
As long as you know who the person is in the real side, then that's fine. And we had already established who he is and his day job, what he wants in his life and all that kind of stuff.
I think
everything else can
also like my job to like shield, like I directed them all very differently and like didn't expose them too much to the complexities and intricacies of what the film was. So they had their world that was quite simple and complete, and I was able to communicate very specifically and build that world with each of you, but like not overwhelm them with like the complexities of the script, and just have them focus on what they're doing. And then like the edit is like where all that complexity kind of comes in, because I think like everyone is kind of like making like a really simple but very miniature detailed painting almost in this film that make up one painting. But it was super exciting to witness, this guy's work every day. You see these people, you like the first audience member, and you're like, you don't want a cold cut. Usually you're having a great time, and like there's so many new layers that are constantly being painted by each of them, and it's so exciting. But yeah, it's been an amazing experience, and it's so great to be here in Cairo. Wow, isn't that amazing?
Yeah.
In a beautiful Art Deco cinema that's no longer a cinema but an art gallery. This is amazing. Like
it's gorgeous.
Yeah.
And what's it like for you to have a film that you've made in the UK come and premiere here in Cairo? Because you've done, films you've been part of Egyptian cinema in the past, so this isn't new to you, but I believe this is the first time you've had a film that you've done overseas that's premiered here.
It's the third time.
Oh, third time.
Yeah, third time, yeah. So I've had a film called Daniel. It premiered at the Cairo Film Festival in 2019. I had Limbo.
Oh, yeah. Okay, that one I should have known.
And I had this, and they were all at the Cairo Film Festival. Amazing. I feel immense like pride whenever I screen a film here in my home country, and I feel super excited and proud to like share something that I worked hard on with some amazing filmmakers. And to show a film like in camera is it's not often that you get to showcase a film that is very kind of, it doesn't follow a normal 3-act structure. It kind of beats to its own drum in a way. So yeah, it's quite cool.
Cool. How are you again doing? Again, I think
I'm going to call it.
Okay.
Yeah, because I'm uncomfortable. I've got bony butt.
My leg's starting to go numb. That's also why.
My foot. I was asleep.
Awesome.
But if you have a burning question.
No. I just have a ton of people going all night. I can hear it with the movies like forever. This is what I love to do. Like, it's watching the movie is one thing, and experiencing it and enjoying it is one thing. And actually talking to people.
Of course.
Part of creating it is
and we appreciate all of the thoughtful questions so much.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you for having us.